Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our three-part series, Flexible Futures, where we'll hear from global recruitment experts, remote work advocates, and HR leaders on the future of flexible work. My name's David Holland, and I've been with Employment Hero for around 6 years. I'm the General Manager of Talent Solutions at Employment Hero, where I lead our employer of record service global teams. In today's session, we'll be focusing on strategies for success, implementing remote work, a how-to guide, if you like, and we'll be delving into practical ways in which you can tackle remote recruitment, as well as establish and successfully manage a flexible team. Throughout today's discussion, I'll be referencing some key insights and statistics from our most recent remote work report, in which we surveyed 6,000 employees from 5 regions around the world about how and where they want to work. These insights will aid in some of our discussions today. Before I introduce our guest speakers, we've allocated time at the end of this webinar for your questions. Please don't hesitate to type in anything that's on your mind into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screens. That's the Q&A box. Try and avoid the chat because it just allows us to curate and save those questions more easily. We'll get to as many as we can in today's session. This session is going to be recorded and will be available as an on-demand webinar after the series has concluded. And so with that in mind, and the fact that we struggle to get to everyone's questions each week, we've actually created a LinkedIn community called Work Remote. Sophia's just thrown the link into the chat right now. This is a closed community on LinkedIn that where we're encouraging HR professional and people managers to go and be able to ask their questions in a friendly environment. I would love all of you to consider joining that if that's a description of you. We'll certainly be available to try and answer some of those questions as we have been, but would also encourage any members of that community that feel they have something to contribute to try and answer those questions as well. So check out that link and we'll get you into that community. With that all done, I now have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for today. First up is Ivy Tan, who's the Managing Director and Founder at CareerMaster. Ivy founded CareerMaster 13 years ago with the mission to be the top choice in human capital solutions across Southeast Asia. So I know that's been a really important question from a lot of our audiences over the last 18 months. As a dedicated executive search and recruitment professional, Ivy has built a team specializing in sourcing senior management across oil and gas, information technology, engineering industries, as well as professional services ranging from sales and marketing, finance and accounting, human resources, and legal. Today, CareerMaster represents clients from local companies to large multinational organizations. Ivy emphasizes the need to truly understand a client's business, culture, and purpose as being critical to successfully partnering with clients to help them grow great teams over the long term. So welcome, Ivy, and thank you for joining us so early in Malaysia.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you for inviting me on this platform, Employment Hero, and David and Hattie. Thank you.
Terrific. We're looking forward to hearing from you in a moment. But also joining us, as delighted as always, I am to welcome Alex Hattingh, the Chief People Officer here at Employment Hero. Alex is the Chief People Officer at Employment Hero and has over 15 years experience in people management and leadership development. Alex derives energy and passion from helping both companies and their employees succeed, and her roles have covered large Fortune 500 companies through to startups, including Google, Yahoo, and Lendlease. Hattie, welcome. You'll be well known to our audiences, so thanks again for sharing your time with us.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Looking forward to today's discussion.
I see you're on the road, so you're dialing in from
I am working remotely. I'm on a farm in Queensland.
Terrific. So as always, I like to start, we're actually going to start with a poll. We're doing this each week, slightly different questions each week, but we'd like to get a bit of an understanding about who our audience is. This week, we want to know a little bit more about what you do. So what is your role? And we're trying to get a sense for how many of you are HR professionals, how many of you are people managers or have responsibility for HR, but aren't necessarily HR trained. How many of you are leader or manager of people, and how many of you work in recruitment? So we'll leave that poll up there for a moment. But in the meantime, We'll start, as always, if that's okay, with getting a bit of an idea from our guests as to their background and journey with remote. And I'm going to start with you, Ivy, because I know that in chatting to you in the last week or so, you've got a business that's quite heavily dependent on the office. You've made that decision. You are a hybrid technically, and you have people who can work remotely. Tell us a little bit about maybe your business, where you're at today, and perhaps reflect more broadly on the trends in Malaysia, if you wouldn't mind.
Right. So, hi everyone again. We are in the business of hiring the right talents for our clients in the shortest turnaround time. And our mission is to empower businesses and enrich lives through dynamic and genius connections. So basically, we help business owners to solve their hiring problems by hiring the right talent, identifying the right talent in the shortest turnaround time possible. At the same time, solving our candidates' problem by finding the right fit in their career. So, and our firm is founded in Malaysia. Our presence is across Asia, and our firm is licensed by the federal authorities under JTK, as well as we are licensed data users in compliance to the PDPA Act by MCMC. So our first remote working experience was probably started during the first movement control order due to the pandemic. And although we did plan ahead of what was coming, looking at our neighboring countries and so on, but when we executed it, we actually ran into problems, a few challenges, such as monitoring staff performances, managing team morale. But however, we eventually managed it through. So I guess it just take a bit of time and a little bit of out of our comfort zone and get the system in place. So, it would be fortunate if we get to know Employment Hero earlier, to enable us to facilitate this. And also with that, we are able to value add so much to our clients as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Ivy. I guess we'll move over to me. So as many on the call would hopefully know, we're on a really big mission to make employment easier and more valuable to everyone. And big part of that is offering remote work through our global teams. And that is where Dutchie comes in as the managing director. And that is providing companies anywhere in the world with the ability to hire people in 54 countries across the globe, where we become the employer of record, and the other employer becomes the host employer. We're sitting at 680 employees. Would you believe that we hired 400 of those remotely? We shifted to 100% remote after the first COVID lockdown in Sydney, Australia. We have employees across approximately 10 companies. Some of those are hired through our global teams function because we don't have an entity in all of those 10 countries. Our highest populations are in Australia and Vietnam. We then have UK, New Zealand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, and then other various countries across the globe. How have our employees reacted? I think we'll go into that in further detail. They are loving remote work. One of the biggest advantages for us at Employment Hero has been the opening of the talent pool. Would you believe pre-COVID, we hired only in Sydney? We were limiting ourselves so much. When we opened up to Australia, we could hire specialists across Australia prior to us going global, which was fantastic. And I think we'll go through the biggest challenges and highlights as we discuss. Back to you, Dutchie.
Fantastic. Just before we jump in, the biggest question that we got asked in our series that we ran last year on remote work, and indeed that I continue to get asked, is, okay, so I'm a business, we're open to the idea of remote, we're having trouble filling roles locally here in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Auckland, but how do I actually find those staff? So in this episode and the next episode, we're being joined by recruiters. In this case, Ivy, I just wanted to ask you a quick question about Career Masters. Which are the sort of top 4 or 5 candidate markets that you currently operate in, or where you're seeing the biggest talent come from? Certainly Malaysia, where you're based. What other countries do you span?
Okay, so you're saying that in terms of the specialization or industries?
No, in terms of geographic reach, when we were talking last, you mentioned there are about 4 or 5 countries across Asia where you
Ah,
see there are, where you're seeing candidates, not necessarily clients so much, but candidates.
right. So right now we are working with candidates not only from Malaysia, but in Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines. If you were to talk about the top 4 to 5 countries in, Asia or Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, terrific. I just wanted to give our audience a bit of a snapshot of where your expertise lies. That's great.
Right.
And interestingly, I'm sure Hattie will come on to this later, but funnily enough, some of those countries have a strong overlap with where we're finding talent in this part of the world at the moment. But Hattie, perhaps just starting with you at the moment, and a lot of our audience today are here to answer the question and find out more about that moment of actually taking the first step and those first few steps of going remote. Since we made the decision as a business to go all remote, what have been some of the key milestones in those early days? Obviously, it was triggered by the pandemic, but we've been planning it for a while, so it was really just the catalyst. What was sort of in those very early days? What were some of the key moments, milestones, decisions that we had to make in those early days of remote?
Yeah, and we had a lot to make. Look, it wasn't a tough decision to make to go remote. We surveyed our employees about 2 months into Sydney going into lockdown, and it was mostly to check on their well-being. However, we threw the question in, who wants to go back to traditional work when it does come back? And 94% of our employees said never. So we immediately listened to them and went to remote first. We were vulnerable though, and we did say, we're going remote first. We will make mistakes. We want to hear from you. So be patient with us. But really, my team, especially along with the ELT, had to take a real step back. We had to review the entire employee life cycle to kind of reevaluate what's needed for remote work. Virtual interviewing, how do we do that? How do we train our managers to do it well? Virtual onboarding, how do we get this, unique DNA culture and have people remotely actually feel our culture prior to them starting, and then onboarding them virtually, making sure they're trained, making sure they're getting to know their team. Team cadence had to be evaluated. We started off with daily huddles for every team to make sure we were having that connection. Also working out your internal cadence, what can be done asynchronously, which means offline and read in your own time. First, what could be done synchronously, which would be a live meeting where everyone in the team is expected to attend. We created a remote work playbook to help guide our people on remote work and to send to new hires as part of their welcome pack. We also implemented one-on-one templates within Employment Hero to really help facilitate those weekly discussions that you must be having with your managers, to take notes and have them really easily accessible within that platform, confidential between a manager and an employee. We implemented OKR discipline so that we were focused on output, not hours worked. You need to amplify your reward and recognition, which we are still working on continuously. You need to have psychological safety for your employees to work flexibly and remotely. So we had leadership really set the example. Look at me today. I'm working at a farm in Queensland. I'm actually located in Sydney, but there's nothing stopping me from putting in a great day of work because I have to get something personal done to our family car. So that's in my calendar. People know that. We have Ben Thompson, our founder and CEO, having his calendar, picking up Henry from school or dropping him off, so that people can see that leadership is setting the example of the advantages of remote work. And you also need to be really conscious about things not slipping, and that's tools. So we started to see Slack be turned into an instant messaging system. We had to pull people back and give rules about it. Do huddles when you can. Don't put essays in Slack. Pick up the phone when you need to give feedback. So we learned lots of lessons. You just have to be vulnerable with your people as well and let them know that you're going to listen to them and read out when you listen to them. If you do a survey, then make sure with those surveys you read out what you're hearing from people. And for me, one of the biggest milestones, Dutchie, was our first ever global gathering. We have one rule when we hire people remotely, and that is that you commit to attending once a year a 5-day global gathering, which is all about social connections, it's about learning, and it's about really getting our mission and our strategy and what we're now calling Master Plan 3.0 and getting all of that information. We did that in Thailand in August, a mammoth effort to get 530 people together. But wow, the best 4 days, 2 days obviously traveling, but just, you know, can you imagine 400 people who had never met each other before all together in Thailand? It was just fantastic.
Yeah, it certainly was. It was a big milestone. Just going back though to those early days, and I'm going to ask you about a sliding door moment. Obviously, we committed as a business to go all remote, but was there a moment that you think was either the point of no return or the aha moment where everyone just seemed to kind of like go, okay, I get this. And I do remember our first all hands, at the risk of prompting you, our first all remote all hands. And it was a little bit chaotic and there was a little bit bumpy, but we got through it. And I think that was the moment for me. But what about you? When did you realize this
there was
going to
a
work?
couple of moments. The first all hands. So we had already sent out that remote work playbook. We'd also taken people through our remote first principles. One of those was, if one person dials into a meeting, everybody dials in. Lo and behold, we dial into our all hands. We have an office in Sydney at 441 Kent Street. There were a bunch of people in our boardroom having beers together. So I had to say, guys, I feel left out. I don't feel included because I want to be sitting with you and having a beer. So take your beer back to your desk, all dial in from your desk, and then you can get together afterwards. That was a big learning. And that is, you do feel excluded if people are in a meeting room together as a team and you're someone dialing in remotely. Hugely important. If one person dials in, everybody dials in. Also, a sliding moment for me was, and Claire wouldn't mind me saying this, our international sales director was always against flexible working and remote work. In her mind, she really felt you had to be together as a sales team to learn, to the point when we interviewed salespeople, we were very upfront. This role will not be able to be done remotely unless absolutely necessary. For example, a dentist appointment. So then she was one of the first to go, wow, Alex, this is working. She uplifted her whole life from Sydney, moved to Wollongong, where her family is now. She's now had one baby. She's just loving life and managing teams remotely. And the sales team are churning, hitting their targets. I won't say everything's perfect, but that was definitely a sliding door moment for me, was having, you know, a director within the company kind of completely against remote work to moving themselves 2.5 hours outside of Sydney to be closer to family and to have her own family.
Wow, there's a lot in that. I'm sure it's going to prompt a lot of questions, and we can dive into some of those things more deeply throughout the conversation. But thanks for that. Ivy, turning to you now, and I think one of the things I'm conscious of is that certainly in Malaysia, if we talk about your own backyard for a moment, there seems to be, from some of the surveys we've done, a strong desire amongst employees and candidates to look at work remotely or flexible work or hybrid work. I get the impression in chatting to you over the last week that perhaps employers are still starting to get still on the journey themselves. What's the status of your clients with regard to remote work? What's the status of employers with remote work in perhaps Malaysia, just as an interesting backdrop?
Right. So as mentioned earlier, more and more companies in Malaysia, across Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, they are more open to hiring remote candidates, especially after this pandemic lockdown. So we do expect this trend to gain traction, especially those sectors who do not face too much difficulties in operations when remote working. So for instance, like we do have Singapore clients right now hiring Malaysians to work from home, totally supporting from home. And our Singapore clients uses very sophisticated online HR management tools, such as the one offered by Employment Hero, after my understanding of, you know, the platform and system that you guys are offering. So yeah, in this sense, to manage their teams effectively and efficiently, clients are also getting more sophisticated in terms of approaching remote working, as they realize the importance of how tech can help them better manage their teams, and that with this being an inevitable trend, they rather prepare themselves earlier than later. So yeah, many are getting onto the idea of hybrid working, remote working, you know, in Malaysia, in Singapore. It's an uptrend now. Yeah, and it's it's so much more job fulfilling among job seekers, young talents. They really like this idea.
Yeah, terrific. All right. We're going to move on in a minute. I'm going to ask you some specific questions about recruitment processes sort of in your regions. But we'll come back to that in a moment. Just in terms of the first poll, Sophia, I don't know if you've got the results of the first poll, and then we're just going to ask a second question. So, okay, so that's surprised me, but most of our audience today are HR professionals, so that's great. Hattie, I'm sure you'll empathise with them. I'm not at all surprised that we've got so many non-HR professionals who have responsibility for HR. It's a very common stepping stone for an organisation prior to scaling. We've got some people managers on here and a couple of recruiters as well, so that's great. Thank you very much for that. Just in terms of our second poll, we want to get a sense from you guys as to how comfortable you are with working remotely. And I'm going to be really interested in this. So we've come up with this scale. Take a moment to read it carefully before you answer. But you know, it's basically a 1 to 5 scale where 5 is acing it. You're all remote and you're nailing it, right through to the first option, which is you really haven't taken that step, and you're very reliant on that. So we'll leave that up for a moment and we'll come back to those results. I'll be very interested to see how we rate ourselves. Hattie, what would you fill out just out of interest for Employment Hero? What would you choose for Employment Hero?
We're definitely, I'm happy to say we're definitely not nailing it. We are reliant on feedback, and I'd probably rate us, I'd rate us the second best. I think we're doing well. What's really interested me as, I guess, maybe a challenge is that need for social connection. Even though we had the global gathering, there is the need for virtual social connection as well as in-person get-togethers on a regional basis. So, for example, our Singapore team got together with 2 of our ELT team members who were traveling there last week for partnership meetings, and the feedback from that team was just phenomenal. You know, a dinner and drinks with 2 senior leaders of the company really made a massive impact on them. So we haven't nailed it.
Terrific. I'm going to jump in with Ivy now, but Hattie, if you can check out the Q&A, I think there's a question there from Shannon that is right up your alley. Not an easy one, but that's why I'm throwing it to you. Ivy, I do want to delve into recruitment because, as I mentioned at the outset, a lot of our audience and our clients ask us about, you know, how do I recruit remotely? I'm conscious of the fact that you've actually worked in remote recruitment in the sense that often you would source senior executives in one region and historically they might actually physically move to the client. You've mentioned that you're starting to see the trend of people recruiting remotely and leaving them remotely. But I guess the question I had for you is, from a world in which we used to have the opportunity to sit across the table from a candidate, to talk to them face to face, and to really get to know them, what's the biggest difference in terms of doing remote recruitment, recruiting people that you may never meet in person till after they start the job, or in fact, the first gathering? What do you see as the biggest differences and skill sets about successfully recruiting remotely?
Okay. So like for remote, most of the time we can only do Zoom, Google Teams, or other digital platforms. So probably there might be some security concerns, or, you know, especially for senior roles. As for local, we can meet face to face, you know, and study their body language. But of course, that's not very time efficient in terms of the very fast moving and changing world. So yeah, and people are not willing to take leaves and, you know, meet us face to face for an interview. Whereas like for Zoom or Google remotely, it's so instant. Yeah. Okay, so that makes us allow us to decide in the shortest time frame and efficiently whether they are the right candidate for our clients. Okay, as for cultural fit, remote, sometimes it could be quite difficult to evaluate the cultural assessment, as probably there's no chance for the remote employee to, you know, come to the office or meet their colleague face to face, right? So however, because of tech, right, so it's better to evaluate nowadays whether the candidate is the right fit for the organization, even though it's not like a face-to-face meeting. So I think tech has evolved so much, and it has supported us in this area so much. Okay, and in terms of like testing, screening, referencing, sometimes remote for roles that requires less or no social skills or leadership positions, platform, can be a little tough due to connectivity issues depending on where you are, and probably a little bit difficult to conduct fair competency or psychometric evaluation. So however, with in terms of local, of course, we can look at their leadership position, their social skills easier. We can study their body language, whether there are any genuine interaction. However, like I said, because of tech, we can competency psychometric evaluation can be done online, and we can get all the data and assessment online as well. So referencing can be done much more easily already. It's already within reach. Yeah.
Are there any particular products or in terms of pre-employment screening and in terms of psychometric or psychological testing, cultural fit, are there any tools off the top of your head that you like in particular, or do you just use whatever the client prefers?
Okay, so myself, I am a certified behavioral consultant, and so right now we are using PISC with our candidates and our clients. Okay, and we do use Strength Finder as well. Yeah. So generally, these are the top two that we are using for clients in terms of psychometric.
Can you just repeat those two names? I didn't catch them. So the two tools that you're using mostly are, what were the names of them?
DISC.
Oh, DISC, yep.
Yeah, DISC. Yep. And the other one is Strength Finders.
Strength Finders. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
You're nodding.
Through Gallup.
Yes, you are right, Gallup. So it evaluates your top 10 strengths. Yeah. Then, we will study the data for clients and assess, is this what the clients are looking for in a candidate? At times, due to certain roles requirement, we do perform IQ tests as well on behalf of client. So these are the few things besides, of course, traditional screening. Yeah. And we have that, and we also provide lots of reference background check on candidates, with their ex-employers, understand them, provide feedback to our clients. So yeah, this is how we hire remotely for our clients instead of meeting face-to-face so much nowadays.
Yeah, okay. I think it isn't a stretch to say that there are certain elements of technology that have actually, if not replicated, actually improved some of our screening processes, certainly made them more scalable. There's certainly some great Australian startups that I've seen, Hattie, that are doing some fantastic pre-employment candidate screening, really looking at trying to get across hundreds of, if not thousands of candidates, and really trying to identify without bias who you should be focused on. Is there any other tools, Hattie, that you think is worth mentioning that people might want to consider?
Yeah, so we use Criteria Corp through Workable, and we also use Codility, and that's specifically around engineering and asking them to do a project just to test their coding skills and see if they're up to par.
Yeah, that's probably an important point. It is horses for courses, isn't it? The type of tools that you would use for someone looking to join our sales and marketing team would be very different to those our product and engineering team. And we do use specific tools, and I'm terrified one day someone's going to ask me to do one of those tests. But hopefully I'm past that now. Ivy, I want to stick with you for a moment and talk about it from the candidate perspective. Because of course, as I mentioned earlier, some of our global insights that we've just done with the 6,000 employees, we know that there is a very high demand for, or a very high, strong desire from candidates to want to work remotely. When you look across your candidates, whether it be in Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, I think there was one other country you mentioned. What's your sort of overall assessment of the candidates actually being ready, not necessarily willing? We know they're willing to work from home. What do you think about the readiness of candidates to be successful in remote work?
Okay, I think in terms of candidate readiness, definitely they need a lot of support from the companies, especially from the hiring managers, right? So some of the advice, in terms of getting candidate readiness to execute efficiently and effectively via remote would be some of the things that the hiring managers can set up to support the candidate, for example, such as communicate regularly to set expectation right for both parties. There should be a very clear and concise communication right from the beginning. The expectation, there should be trackable KPIs in place, the accountability, the reporting system, and also setting up regular meetings to follow up on employees' work. So yeah, so these are the things that that could help candidates to develop a readiness to accept this idea and start work remotely efficiently. Yeah.
Yeah,
Look,
they're
the
great
thematic-
points, Ivy. Sorry, not to jump in, but also providing a new person with a buddy that might be a peer rather than a manager. So someone that they can rely on to, so they don't feel stupid asking questions or where to find things. One of the biggest challenges we've found is instituting a documentation culture. We're very much startup. We work fast, we work hard, and if you can't keep up with Slack, it's really difficult. So implementing that documentation culture so new people can go to somewhere, whether it's Confluence or Google Drives, they know where to self-find information. It's really vital to setting new people up to succeed.
Yeah, the thing that I keep hearing coming out is setting up that structures. We talk a lot about being intentional in going remote. Remote isn't something that you just do. Remote is something that requires planning and investment and purpose. No different to the way we used to set up offices. We used to put a lot of thought into how we set up offices, how we manage our workday, how we do lunches and things like that. Remote's no different. You need to be intentional and purposeful and really plan it out. And some of these topics that you're bringing up around, Ivy, you mentioned KPIs and we use OKRs, which Hattie mentioned earlier. OKRs is just a goal framework called objectives and key results. KPIs work well in heavily metric driven roles like sales, perhaps. So there's a ton of those kind of things that we can go into in detail. And if we don't cover them today, the next episode, we'll be talking about optimizing remote. But just before we leave sort of recruitment per se, Ivy, I know that sourcing great candidates is top of mind for Australia. The statistics that we see around trying to recruit people in Australia and New Zealand right now is insane. We've got record low levels of unemployment, record participation, and the ratio of job roles to available candidates is making HR managers cry, recruitment managers cry. What are some of the key markets that you're seeing great candidates in? And again, focusing on the knowledge working roles that perhaps lend themselves to remote work. What are you seeing in terms of your markets for finance and accounting, technology and development, those kind of roles? Can you give us a bit of a snapshot on what you're seeing from a candidate perspective?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, so for remote employees, some of the roles that you mentioned are definitely workable, like as you mentioned, finance, accounting, law, human resource, data entry, customer service representative, marketeers like online marketeers, digital marketeers, telemarketers, sales, or software, IT related, virtual assistants. So these are the areas that in terms of for remote working is definitely workable. And there is a great pool of such professional candidates around this region, across Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and because of the fluency of language in the command in English. So these are the pool of candidates, for Australia clients, definitely they can consider to hire remotely to support their organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, Hattie, I'm going to throw this one to you. Question without notice, sorry, but one of the things I've noticed from our own evolution is we've got this traditional hub in Vietnam where we're very scaled to the point that we even have, our own operations and HR dedicated to that region. But we're also at the stage where we're employing our first and second employee in new countries. And the one that comes to mind is Indonesia, which Ivy just mentioned. What's the difference between us onboarding people in, say, a very mature country where we've got mature operations like Vietnam versus Indonesia, where I think Felix was probably our first employee, and that was an interesting experience.
Absolutely. So you do need to go with a more senior person, someone that has the maturity and the experience to self-manage, to work on their own, to have the confidence to reach out to their manager and their team when they need things. Whereas with Vietnam, we're more focused on bringing in those more junior levels where we've got great career pathing and great mentors to help those more junior, whether they're grads or they've only had a couple of years of experience. We have really fantastic intermediate and senior engineers over there and coders that really do mentor them and help them to get to the next level. And, you know, we do see promotions every single year of going through that team in Vietnam. So if you're looking at a random country like Indonesia, where you might be hiring your first or second person, just make sure that they do have a number of years of experience and that maturity level, both in terms of work and EQ, emotional intelligence as well.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in that's exactly the sort of insight I was looking for. So I think those self-starters, slightly more experienced. Ivy, would you concur with that? If you're going to have a team of one sitting somewhere by themselves, go with the slightly more mature, experienced candidates initially and build out from there. Does that gel with you?
Yeah, I agree with what Hattie has mentioned. In terms of the characteristics, someone who, you know, is a motivator, self-starter, someone who know what he or she is doing on the job, the level of discipline, and it's very much more about the output, not about the numbers, you know, spent at work. Yeah, so these are some of the candidates characteristic we are looking for in the candidate besides their qualification or experiences. Yeah,
terrific. All right. I think working when you're looking to recruit candidates for remote work, you really need to understand the requirements. I think working with experienced recruiters is a big advantage there. I think in the case of Vietnam, Hattie, we're more mature. We know what we look for. We do it all ourselves. But we have certainly worked with recruiters in country to source people in countries where we're less experienced. I think that's good use of that investment. Just before we move on to some questions, and there's a few flooding in now, Hattie, learning and development in a remote environment, probably something that we didn't give a lot of thought to back in March 2020 when we thought the world was ending and we were scrambling to go remote, but certainly something I've noticed over the last 12 months, and the key hire from you to our team, learning and development in a remote needs to be purposeful and intentional as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, intentional and purposeful. And also, you know, you can look at it in a more positive way. There are no constraints around having to be physically present. You do need to make sure that the L&D is interactive though. So it's not just presenting to someone, because they're going to get bored. They're going to be multitasking. So you want them to absorb the information. And so you need to also work with the leaders on what their needs are with their teams and what are their skill gaps. Ask your employees again, survey them. What do they want out of L&D? How are you going to help develop their career? And we've done training around remote management, for example, that was new to all of our managers. Again, making it really interactive. An example there is doing breakout rooms through Zoom, where you're getting smaller groups together to solve a problem so that it is really interactive, and allowing people to be vulnerable in those breakout rooms. So they're not necessarily talking in front of 50 people. They might be in a breakout room of 5 people, have a confidential conversation, pop back into the room of 50 and read out what they've been working on. Also, making sure you reinforce L&D. So it's a well-known statistic that any new habit within an adult takes 120 days to form. So just by attending a virtual classroom, you're not going to be instilling new habits. So you do need to have reminders that go out so that people remember and have triggers that remind them on what they may have learned and how are they going to change their behavior, or perhaps be more intentional about the way they approach work.
Yeah, terrific. And I think in terms of tools for learning and development, apart from shout out to our own team who do a brilliant job, there are some great tools available for L&D. You know, I certainly know we have a great partnership with Go1, who's an Australian business that's doing great things in that space. Ivy, from a learning and development perspective, is there anything in your region that stands out in terms of professional development tools, education tools? I know LinkedIn Learning is very popular in some countries. Is that something you see a lot of?
In terms of L&D, from my side, I see lots of professional candidates who are looking for like free resources. As you mentioned, they will log on to LinkedIn or Udemy. Udemy, they pay at a low fee. In terms of corporates, since the pandemic period until now, what they do is they engage training organizations to conduct trainings remotely. And in fact, I have done training in terms of DISC, as I just mentioned, for one of our clients who are based in, their staffs are based across Dubai, Sydney, and Malaysia. So everyone log on to this platform remotely to learn. And also we did a blackout room so that we can form into smaller groups, and everyone can share in the smaller rooms where we have facilities to assist. So it's definitely doable. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Terrific. And it is important. It's one of those things that's easy to drop when you go remote, and it's so vital. And we've really invested hard in that in the last 12 months for great reward. Okay, I want to jump across to, I might come back to you guys with some further questions around ongoing management and engagement, but I do want to make sure we answer some questions if that's okay. Firstly, Julia, great questions, great comments, great observations. I'd love to see you in our LinkedIn community. I think there's a great opportunity for you to share some of your obvious expertise. So please go ahead and join that community and consider sharing some of your views there. The first question I'm going to come to is an interesting one, because I saw the word ageism and I instantly leapt to inclusion and diversity, and we talked a lot about that last week. But actually the question is a good one because it asks about ageism in the context of candidates who may struggle with the technology, tools and new ways of working in a remote environment. So is that something, Ivy or Hattie, that you've come across with candidates who are being potentially interested in a remote role, but don't necessarily have the confidence that they can thrive with the tools and the environment? Is that something either of you have experienced?
I haven't come across it. I think, though, you do need to ask those questions during your interview process. How comfortable are you working remotely? How comfortable are you with technology? Even ask on a scale of 1 to 10. Back to Julie's point before, behavioural questions. Ask for some examples of where they have worked with technology remotely. And if you do have an office or a hub and you are seeing ageism happen or bias, try and hire those people. So for me, if I saw that happening, I would start hiring people in Sydney where we have a hub, or Vietnam where we have an office, where those people can actually go in and work with other people.
Yep. Okay. And Ivy, is because you work with a lot of senior management positions, I guess a lot of those people are in industries where they're site-based. So have you seen the ageism and remote crossover at all, or is that still something you're yet to experience?
Yeah, it happens across the younger generation and also senior management. So like one of our recent experience is that our client was hiring a senior C-level position for their Vietnam plant. So however, when the borders wasn't open, the candidate couldn't, with all the documents, the candidates couldn't even go over to Vietnam to commence work. So he has been like working from home, supporting the plant in Vietnam with all his years of experiences and expertise for the past 1.5 years before the borders finally opened, and he flew over there to look at the site and what are the matters that he could jump in and things like that. As for now, I understand that our candidate is actually traveling heavily in between Malaysia and Vietnam because his family members are still in Malaysia. The plant is in Vietnam, so it's like I say, it's workable. He can be on some days he could be in the Vietnam plant solving site problems. On some days he can just be with his family members and supporting in terms of expertise and advisory matters. Yeah. So we are seeing the trend across I would say all levels.
Yeah, look, I think I'll just draw out a couple of things from that. Firstly, I would re-emphasize the point that I defaulted to here. Getting access to, as someone who's crossed the 50-year-old barrier myself, getting access to years of experience is worth the investment. But again, you do need to think, and that's why I think prompted the question, you do need to think about how you support those employees in a remote and tech-led world. To that end, we actually had on the webinar last week, Shannon from Get Set Up, and I'm just going to pop the link to their website in the chat. They are a global business. I think they started up out of the US, but they're very much remote and global, that specialize in helping older people access training for things. And for example, on their website, I'm sure I've seen how to participate in a Zoom call. So I might, hopefully, that was an anonymous questioner there, but hopefully that gives you one practical tool that you can perhaps look into as to how you support people. I'm probably going to have to sign up there myself Thursday. Shannon's on next week. I apologize. So you'll get to hear from Shannon there. Hattie, I want to jump into the meaty question that was asked by another Shannon, unrelated, I expect, but this is a difficult one. How do you manage the risk obligations from workers' compensation and health and safety to move from an office-based environment to a pure remote work? And I know,
great question, Shannon. Great
it's a big
question.
topic.
Big topic, and that's where Dutchie's Global Teams team come in. So they know all of the legislation and everything that is required within countries where we've never hired before, for example, Indonesia. What do you do there for health and safety? You also need to have a policy in place where employees do sign off on the fact that their home environment or their remote environment is fit for work. So, a checklist, create that. We have great checklists and great tools on our external website. If you go to resources, you'll be able to download templates there which are around remote work, setting up your workstation, making sure it is compliant with all health and safety needs, and then they're signing off on that. And sometimes it's good to get them to send in a photo, and you throw that into their file. For us, it's easy. We use Employment Hero, so it's super easy to upload or to send that paperlessly. So you can send it online for them to sign, and they can upload a photo of their workstation or where they're working remotely to make sure you're ticking that box. And always relying on the experts in global teams for tax requirements, for payroll requirements, for workers' compensation, and everything within our global teams team. They've just been terrific, and the knowledge they have across all of those countries is just phenomenal. Could not do it without them, Shannon.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on, and there's a related question coming up on this. Firstly, Ivy, perhaps I'll just ask you from a contractual and legal perspective. Obviously, I know you help clients navigate the issue of compensation because you provide surveys and you're obviously deep in these markets. And perhaps just say a little bit about how you help clients navigate compensation between, say, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia. What do you do to help clients in that respect?
Okay. Of course, we run salary market survey across, like, let's say our client, it's from the food industry, say, for example, then we would zoom into that area where our client is from and study the surrounding companies in the same industries or specialization. And also we will work on the positions that have been assigned to us by our client. We study the positions, compensation and salary remuneration as well. And we do a market survey, a salary report, and furnish that to our client so that our client can have a big idea of like how much the companies in this industry, in this specialization surrounding compensating to their talents, so that they can have a better frame to set up the remuneration package for the talent that they want to hire. So this is some of the value add service that we have provided to our clients as well. In case they do not understand the local market, or across Singapore, Malaysia, how much do they compensate their talents? This is what we can do so they can have a better idea in preparation of hiring the right talent for their organization.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm going to add two observations. One is that, firstly, around compensation and benefits. I think at a headline level, compensation is a relatively transparent thing, and people like Ivy and her organization will help you understand what the compensation that's appropriate for, and by compensation I mean base salaries that are required to get a particular person of a particular experience in any given market. I think where it gets a little bit harder or a little bit more opportunity to be smart is around the benefits. And Hattie, I know, for example, that annual leave is a great one. Annual leave and sick leave vary greatly between geographies and countries. We've actually made a decision that we tend to try and harmonize up a lot of countries that are below, say, using Australia. That's just where we started. It's where we have most of our employees. How do we try and harmonise, except in those countries that have even more generous? Is that right? So harmonising benefits is probably something to think about.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you can offer someone more vacation days, it's gold for them. But then also, I think one of the great things that Global Teams also helps us with are the on costs in various countries. So you've got to keep in mind, pensions or superannuation, they're all different. There are different payroll taxes that you have to pay. So understanding that whole cost of the employee. So whilst a wage may appear lower, it is going to have on costs, and you need to have an expertise team that can give you that advice.
Yeah, and at the risk of deep diving into that, so Global Teams is our employer of record service that allows our clients to employ people in pretty much any country in the world. Certainly anywhere you'd want to recruit from. We provide our clients up front with a line-by-line breakdown of how the base salary turns into a total cost with all the social security, pension, housing development funds. Every country has their own. So we try and make that as easy as possible. But to come back to the second part of the question, which I forget who it was from now, was around OH&S. Hattie, you touched on that and how we do it. What I'd add to that is, and there's a related question here about hybrid, where people are working from both the office part of the week and from home. It is important that you invest in someone's physical infrastructure. Hattie, you'll have to remind me of our policy. Is it a $500 contribution?
Well, so it's a $500 work from home allowance, plus we send them their laptop, choice of a Dell or a Mac, plus a monitor, mouse, everything to set them up at home. And then that $500 allowance is to spend on, let's say, an office chair or something to set them up properly. And Angela, you've made a great question there. Yes, you do need to have both options. And that's part of your EVP and your offering and your employee experience. Is to be able to provide those to anyone who's working remotely, as well as we have set up hot desks in our hubs so that no one has a dedicated desk, but they all have plug and play monitors and they charge a laptop, they all have a keyboard, they all have a mouse, etc.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. The chair I'm sitting in was a very big investment, which I was very grateful for for my allowance to do that. I've got a great desk. I've got the monitor, the laptop, everything. So it is important. I think, again, it comes back to this purposeful investment and thoughtfulness around how you go remote. If in an ideal world, because we're all remote and we don't have the expenses of the office, we're able to make that investment in that and our global gatherings and things, but investing in the physical infrastructure is important. In the Employment Hero platform, for those who have access to it, there are some FAQs in what's called our knowledge base, which will also talk about setting up remote or OHS in the context of home. So if you're using the Employment Hero platform, check out your FAQs or hop over to the LinkedIn community and we can talk about it there. Hattie, I'm just going to, at this point, I know we're putting this up at the end, but I'm just going to share the Career Master site for those of you who are interested in getting in touch and learning more about salaries and compensation and candidates across Ivy's market. You can hit them up via the website, but there'll be some further contact details coming. A couple more questions coming in. The names of the learning and development tools. Certainly, Go1's a great online global company. We actually have a partnership with them. So if you're an Employment Hero client, you'll be able to access the LMS, the Learning Management System for Go1 through our platform. LinkedIn Learning, is it called, Hattie? Is that still a thing?
That's a really good one. And that just requires a premium upgrade if you don't want to go into the really expensive enterprise option. The other tool we've found really useful, which we kicked off at our global gathering, is something called Insights Discovery, which is not dissimilar to using a Gallup tool around your strengths. And this one, and it's also very similar to DISC, it's based on colors. And we really learned a lot about each other and how you have to flex your style, whether you're managing someone or whether you're managing up or whether you're talking to a peer. The way you talk to them and influence them based on this personality profile really has made a massive impact to the way we work remotely and the way we interact with each other. So Insights Discovery is what that's called.
Terrific. Hopefully that answers the question from Bronwyn. Just in terms of the evidence, Tanya, yes, absolutely. Our employees, we like them to provide evidence that they've spent the allowance correctly. Hattie mentioned the photo, which is a great one, but also uploading receipts and stuff like that. So I think from my perspective, I really put the responsibility on the direct hiring manager, the person to whom they report on a daily basis, to do check-ins with them. We're constantly on huddles and videos. It's easy to see when someone's not comfortable, compromised, doesn't have a quiet space, and we really work with people one-on-one to fix that. Right, so there's a few more questions coming in. Actually, they're mostly comments, which are fantastic. I would love you to share those over in the community. The question about an organization has specific roles that can't be performed remotely, what I call site-based roles. How do we identify this for candidates? I'm not quite sure whether the question is how do they identify candidates or identify, sorry, Christine, I'm not quite sure what the question is, but feel free to jump into LinkedIn and ask. If there are no more questions there, I might just come back to one last question for each of you, which is kind of around this recurring question that I see constantly about the hybrid team. And Ivy, maybe you're able to comment on this, being a hybrid business yourself. How do you manage the context switching? So one day I might be in the office face-to-face with my colleagues. One day I might be on Teams, or I forget what, I think you use Teams. How do you manage that context switching? Is there any tips that you have around that?
From my personal experience in terms of like context switching, I think it's really down to, again, the clear and concise job description and requirements for each and every one's role. You know what your colleague is doing, your colleague know what you're doing, and a clear reporting system and SOP set up right from the beginning. Definitely a competitive remuneration will keep someone motivated working remotely, you know, and and also we can look into the idea of gamifying the role, so as it is to make it more fun to attract the younger generation. In terms of the success factors that we can based on this hybrid that we have experienced from our clients and ourselves, I think clear KPIs communicated to remote employees should be set up right from the beginning, and the employees need to be equipped with the right tools and skills to complete their tasks with efficiency and competency. There should be transparency across all processes to enable clear understanding and guidelines. Definitely regular communication via online between employers and employees on setting the right expectation for both parties. So I think if all these guidelines are pretty clear, it should be quite flexible and workable to switch between remote and hybrid. Yeah.
Fantastic. You mentioned in there, you said something about SOPs, which I'm going to assume are standard operating procedures, or can you share an example of an SOP that you might have set up just so people can understand the context?
Yeah, like some of the reporting systems, and after this task, what is the next task to do? What are the steps of communication channel when you encounter certain problems working remotely? Who is the go-to? What is the next course of action? Yeah, and some of the SOPs, like how to use some of the back-end systems the company has set up to enable you. Yeah.
Yeah, understood. We'll talk about the need for documentation and communication in our next episode. So that's a great segue. Thank you very much, Ivy. Look, we're out of time. Fortunately, we didn't get to most people's questions today, I think. If you've got any other questions that you want, though, first of all, up on the screen now, you can see a way to reach out to Alex and Ivy if you've got any questions for them specifically. Definitely thank Ivy very much for joining us today and giving us your time and your insights, and we look forward to keeping in touch over the coming months. We definitely have a lot of interest from clients about building teams overseas. We've got the expertise to help you onboard and manage them compliantly and keep them engaged, but people like Ivy are going to be critical in helping our clients connect with great candidates. Hattie, as always, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dutchy. Thanks, Ivy.
Thanks, guys. So there's the link that we... Sorry, Ivy. Well, there's the link we published earlier. It is a closed group, so we will have to let you in. We want to focus on HR professionals and people who manage remotely. We want it to be a place where that community can discuss and ask in confidence and get sensible answers from competent people. So I would love to see you all over in that chat. But as it is, we are now out of time. One last time, thank you to Ivy and Alex for joining us. The registrations for the next episode, which I think is on Thursday this week, are out, and we would love for you all to join us then. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you then.